So welcome to another episode of Matt's Mailbox, where you guys send in your questions and I do my best to answer them. If you'd like to get your question answered in the next episode, don't forget to leave those in the comment section below. So the first question this week comes in from Marty the HD Gamer, and he asks, do you think Battlefield 4 is now beyond repair? Or do you still think this game could be a success? Now my short answer to this question, do I think the game is beyond repair? No, but could it still be a success? Well, that really does depend. Now let me explain what I mean. Now Battlefield 4 is a game that I've always said I think is a good game, it's a great game that's in need of repair. Now in contrast, something like Medal of Honor Warfighter, I always thought was not a very good game, and it would have taken an extreme amount of effort and work to actually make that become a decent game. Of course, this is just my own opinion, but Battlefield 4 is a good game in need of repair. So I always try and compare this to a car analogy. This is going to sound very strange, but please bear with me. Battlefield 4 I see is a Ferrari or a sports car that just has a non-working engine. All it needs to do is have the engine replaced, have the engine fine-tuned and tweaked, and you've got yourself a pretty smart sports car again. But a game like Medal of Honor Warfighter is a Daewoo Lanos, let's say. It's a car that's not very good, and even with a brand new engine, a new paint job, you're still going to be driving around in a Daewoo. So these are the kind of contrasts I'm trying to show you guys, that Battlefield 4 has the potential to still be a great game. It just needs some small changes made. So it definitely isn't beyond repair. Of course, we know there are still issues with the netcode, and some of these issues they have now admitted are so complex that they can never be perfect. The game is never going to be the perfect shooter we all want to see from Battlefield, but it still can be vastly improved, and it still could be a great game. Now, whether or not it could be successful, well, this still depends. Now, of course, it depends on your terminology of successful. When the game was first released, it got massive sales in its first week on its day of release. I think EA were pretty pleased with the way the sales went when the game was first released, so you could already argue the game has been successful as it was expected to be in its first few weeks of release. Now, of course, since then there's been lots of issues. Now practically everyone sees Battlefield 4 as a little bit of a failure so far. So in the long run, could the game still be successful? Well, I already think it has been successful in the first few weeks in terms of sales and stuff like that, but if they want to keep that game, if this wants to be a game that we look back on in 3 or 4 years and think, you know what, Battlefield 4 was a good game, that kind of success may be a little bit hard to achieve. Now, this game has definitely been tainted now. We already have a bit of a bad taste in our mouth now from Battlefield 4. So in the long run, it may be hard for Battlefield 4 to be the success of, say, Bad Company 2, a game that we all look back on with fond memories in time. But it could also arguably be an already successful game when you look at the sales it's already had so far. But as I said, I definitely don't think this game is beyond repair. I do still have faith in EA and DICE, of course. They've come forward now and admitted there are issues with the game that are going to be concentrated on and fixed. EA themselves have almost admitted it was their fault this game was rushed out, because they've said what needs to be done to fix this game now is more time and effort concentrated on it, which is something that obviously wasn't put in when the game was first released. It was rushed out to meet deadlines, so that time now is being made up for. Other titles are being set back, and I do still think this game has it in it to be a real good title and sequel to Battlefield 3. Now the second question from today comes in from Posh Assassin, and he asks, would you like to see Battlefield 5 single player to be more open like the original Bad Company, or should it have no single player at all? Now to start answering this question, I'm going to ask you guys another question. In the comment section below, how many of you completed the single player for Battlefield 4? In fact, how many of you completed it for Battlefield 3, or for that matter, Medal of Honor Warfighter? Because we all know a lot of time and effort is spent making the single player of these games, and we know the majority of people don't actually play them. Now, of course, the single player of these games always acts as the backbone for the multiplayer. The locations, the storyline, the set, the characters are all based off loosely what we see in the single player. But of course, when we look back into the history of the Battlefield series, especially when DICE first started making them before they were with EA, Battlefield 1942, Battlefield Vietnam, none of these games actually had a single player. All the time and money and effort was concentrated on making the multiplayer, so maybe this would actually be a remedy for the issues we're seeing in all of these modern FPS online shooters. If we just dropped the single player and all the time and effort of the next 2 years between now and the next game, or whenever it is released, is all concentrated on the multiplayer, maybe we wouldn't have the same issues we have with Battlefield 4. So for me personally, I would happily sacrifice any single player aspect, or co-op aspect for that matter, if it just meant we got a really solid multiplayer. Now this is something that EA are doing with their future titles. Of course, their next big FPS shooter, Titanfall, out in less than 2 months now, is an entirely multiplayer based game. And for me personally, this gives me some confidence. It means that the development team have spent however many years making this game entirely concentrating on the multiplayer aspect. So hopefully we won't see the same issues we've seen with Battlefield 4. But they're all the questions I have time for this week. I hope you did enjoy this episode. If you did, hit me up with a like. It does help me out a lot, and leave all your thoughts and questions in the comments below. But in the meantime, guys, thank you for watching, and I will see you soon.